Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into Donna Tartt's
Oh,
captivating novel, The Secret History. Um,
yeah.
this modern classic kind of takes us into the world of dark academia, where the pursuit of knowledge and beauty takes a sinister turn.
Right.
It's a story that explores the complexities of morality, the allure of exclusivity, and the dangerous consequences of seeking forbidden knowledge.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's so fascinating about this novel is that it kind of throws you right into the middle of the mystery.
Yeah.
You know, from the very beginning that a student, Bunny Corcoran, has been murdered, but you don't know why or by whom.
Right.
And Tartt just masterfully uses this mystery to pull you through the story, unraveling the events that lead to this tragic act.
Right from the start, you get this sense of foreboding,
Yes.
like something terrible is about to happen. But then she also weaves in these beautiful descriptions of the campus, the rituals,
Yes.
the characters themselves,
Yes.
making the darkness even more unsettling.
Exactly. And I think that juxtaposition of beauty and violence is one of the core themes of the novel. Tartt seems to be suggesting that they're inextricably linked, that the pursuit of beauty can sometimes lead to these destructive consequences.
Yeah, so let's break down the main plot points and the key themes that we'll be exploring.
Okay.
The story follows Richard Papin, a young man from California who transfers to this elite college in New England. And he becomes utterly captivated by this group of classic students who are portrayed as these intellectuals with a deep appreciation for ancient Greek culture and philosophy. But there's also this air of secrecy and elitism surrounding them.
Right. And Richard is completely drawn to their world.
Yes.
You know, he sees them as sophisticated and intellectual, everything that he feels like he's lacking. And this group represents a chance for him to escape his ordinary past and reinvent himself, which feeds into that theme of isolation and belonging that runs throughout the novel.
And he's so desperate to be accepted by them that he's willing to overlook some pretty significant red flags, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most compelling aspects of The Secret History is how Tartt explores the psychology of longing and belonging. Richard is so caught up in this idealized vision of this group that he ignores his own instincts,
Yeah.
convincing himself that they're the key to a more meaningful existence.
He even switches his major to classics, even though he seems to be more interested in literature than ancient Greek. It's as if he's trying to mold himself into someone he thinks they'll accept,
Right.
even if it means sacrificing his own passions.
And this speaks to the themes of illusion and self-deception that are so central to the novel. You know, Richard is constructing this fantasy about this group and his place within it. He's so eager to be part of their inner circle that he blinds himself to their flaws and the potential danger that they represent.
And the group itself is fascinating. You have Henry Winter, the intellectual leader, Francis Abernathy, the flamboyant and somewhat neurotic one. The twins, Charles and Camilla Macaulay, who are beautiful, enigmatic, and deeply connected to each other. And then there's Bunny Corcoran, who, even within this unique group, seems like the odd man out.
Right. Each character is so richly drawn with their own quirks and complexities.
Yeah.
Tartt doesn't shy away from portraying their flaws, their jealousies, their moments of cruelty, but she also gives you these glimpses of their vulnerability, their longing for connection, which makes their descent into darkness all the more tragic.
The novel really delves into the dynamics of this group, showing how their shared obsession with beauty and knowledge becomes a justification for their increasingly reckless behavior.
Yes.
There's a passage that really captures this where Richard says, "Beauty is terror. Whatever we call beautiful, we quiver before it."
That's a powerful quote. And it really gets to the heart of the novel's exploration of the darker side of human nature. You know, this group becomes convinced that their pursuit of beauty and knowledge places them above conventional morality. It's as if they believe they're entitled to a different set of rules,
Why?
which is where things start to go very wrong.
And then there's the pivotal event that changes everything, the Bacchanal.
Yes, the Bacchanal. This is where Tartt plunges us into the heart of the darkness that lies at the core of this group. They're attempting to recreate an ancient Greek ritual, fueled by drugs and alcohol, seeking a kind of transcendent experience, a glimpse into the Dionysian mysteries they've been studying. But instead of finding enlightenment, they unleash chaos and violence.
It's a turning point in the novel where their intellectual pursuits collide with the raw, primal forces that they've been trying to tap into. They end up accidentally killing a farmer during this frenzied ritual.
And this accidental killing becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. It shatters their carefully constructed world, exposing the brutality that lies beneath their intellectual facade.
Instead of facing the consequences of their actions, they make a pact to cover up the murder, which binds them together in this web of guilt and secrecy that will ultimately unravel their lives.
Right, they've crossed a moral boundary, and from this point forward, the story becomes a chilling exploration of the psychological effects of their crime.
This decision to hide their crime marks a point of no return. They convince themselves that they had no choice, that they're protecting something precious, something that sets them apart from the ordinary world. But in reality, they're sinking deeper into a moral abyss, and their attempts to justify their actions become increasingly desperate. The novel then explores the aftermath of this first murder and how the group's dynamics start to shift. The guilt and paranoia begin to eat away at them, manifesting in different ways for each character. Richard, for example, becomes increasingly reliant on drugs and alcohol to numb his anxiety and fear.
He's also haunted by the image of Camilla during the Bacchanal. Tartt describes her as being limp in Henry's arms, her head thrown back like a dead girl's, and the curve of her throat beautiful and lifeless. It's such a vivid and disturbing image, and it speaks to the way that beauty and death become intertwined in Richard's mind.
It's like he's both repulsed and strangely fascinated by the darkness that he's witnessed. And Francis, who's always been a bit high-strung, becomes even more unstable and withdrawn after the murder. He starts having panic attacks, and his obsession with cleanliness and order becomes even more pronounced, almost as if he's trying to cleanse himself of the guilt.
And then there's Bunny.
Right, Bunny becomes a real problem. He knows their secret.
Yes.
And he starts to use it against them, demanding money, threatening to expose them. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic, and the group, already burdened by their guilt, starts to see him as a liability, a threat to their carefully constructed facade.
You start to see how the group's isolation, which initially felt like a source of power and distinction, begins to turn against them. Their shared secret becomes a prison, isolating them from the world and from each other. They become trapped in this cycle of paranoia and fear, constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering when their carefully constructed world will come crashing down. And it's like they've created their own moral code, one that justifies their actions and allows them to maintain that sense of superiority.
Yeah.
They see themselves as above the law, as if their intellectual pursuits somehow exempt them from conventional morality.
And that sense of entitlement becomes even more twisted as the story progresses. I mean, their initial crime, the accidental death of the farmer during the Bacchanal,
Right.
that was driven by a kind of reckless abandon, a desire to transcend the boundaries of ordinary experience.
Yeah.
But their decision to kill Bunny is cold and calculated.
Yes. The second murder is even more chilling because it's premeditated. They plan it out meticulously. They choose the secluded location in the woods, and they lure Bunny to his death. Right. It's a stark contrast to the idealized image of themselves that they've been clinging to, revealing the true depths of their moral corruption.
And Tartt doesn't shy away from the grim details of the murder itself. She describes this scene in the woods with such chilling precision that you feel like you're right there with them.
Yes.
Witnessing the brutality of their actions.
It's a pivotal moment in the novel because it exposes the fragility of the illusion that they've been carefully constructing. Up until this point, they've managed to convince themselves that they're somehow different, that their intellectual pursuits elevate them above the common masses.
Right.
But their willingness to commit cold-blooded murder shatters that illusion, revealing them to be just as flawed and capable of violence as anyone else.
And the aftermath of Bunny's murder is where the novel really delves into the psychological consequences of their actions. Each character responds to the guilt and paranoia in their own way, but they're all profoundly changed by what they've done.
Richard, in particular, descends further into a spiral of drug abuse and self-destruction. He's tormented by nightmares and hallucinations, and he becomes increasingly isolated from the group, as if he can no longer bear the weight of their shared secret.
There's a passage where he describes himself as feeling like a ghost in my own life. And I think that really captures that sense of alienation and detachment that he experiences.
Right.
It's as if he's lost his sense of self, consumed by the guilt and paranoia.
And Francis, who's always been prone to anxiety and emotional outbursts, becomes even more unstable. He retreats further into his world of rituals and obsessions, desperately trying to cling to some semblance of order in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and threatening.
It's interesting to note that Francis is the one who initially resists the idea of killing Bunny. He's horrified by the suggestion, but he ultimately succumbs to the group's pressure, unable to stand up to Henry's manipulative influence.
That's one of the things that makes Francis such a tragic character. He has a strong moral compass, But he's also incredibly weak-willed and easily swayed by those around him. He becomes a symbol of the dangers of groupthink, of how even those who recognize the immorality of an action can be swept along by the collective will.
And then there are the twins, Charles and Camilla, who have always seemed so close, so inseparable. But even their bond begins to fray under the immense pressure of their shared secret.
Charles, who's always been the more volatile of the two, turns to alcohol to numb his pain and guilt. He becomes increasingly aggressive and unpredictable, lashing out at Camilla and the others.
And Camilla, who's always been portrayed as the more composed and reserved twin, starts to withdraw into herself. There's a sense that she's deeply traumatized by the event, but she's unable to express her feelings, to articulate the horror that she's experiencing.
Their codependent relationship, which has always been a source of strength and comfort, begins to feel suffocating, like a cage that they can't escape. They're bound together by their shared secret, but they're also pulling away from each other, unable to bear the weight of their mutual guilt, the growing sense of unease that pervades their relationship.
It's a stark contrast to that idyllic image of them that Richard initially perceived. He saw them as this perfect, untouchable pair. But the reality is far more complex and ultimately tragic.
Exactly. The murders shatter the illusion of perfection that surrounded the group, exposing the flaws and vulnerabilities that lie beneath the surface.
And then there's Henry, the mastermind behind both murders. What's fascinating about Henry is that he never seems to experience any real remorse for his actions. He intellectualizes everything, even the most horrific acts,
right,
viewing them through this detached philosophical lens.
He's a fascinating and deeply unsettling character. He's clearly brilliant and he has a charismatic hold over the group, but he's also completely amoral. He sees the world as a game and he's willing to manipulate and exploit others to achieve his own ends, even if it means destroying their lives.
There's a chilling passage where he talks about the murders as being necessary sacrifices in the pursuit of beauty and knowledge. It's as if he believes that their intellectual pursuits give them the right to disregard the laws and morality that govern ordinary people.
And his detachment becomes even more pronounced after Bunny's death. He shows no outward signs of guilt or remorse, and he continues to manipulate the others, playing on their fears and insecurities to maintain his control over them.
It's almost as if he's trying to convince himself and the others that what they've done is somehow justified, that they're not criminals, but rather enlightened individuals who have transcended the limitations of conventional morality.
But his attempts at self-justification ring hollow, and the cracks in his facade begin to show. He becomes increasingly isolated from the group, as if he realizes that even his intellectual prowess can't shield him from the consequences of his actions.
And his ultimate fate is one of the most haunting aspects of the novel. He commits suicide, leaving the others to grapple with the weight of their crimes without his intellectual guidance, his manipulative presence.
His suicide can be interpreted in many ways. On one level, it's an act of cowardice, a way of escaping the consequences of his actions.
Right.
But it can also be seen as a final act of control, a way of choosing his own destiny rather than facing the judgment of others.
And it leaves the remaining members of the group in a state of utter despair. They're no longer under his spell, but they're also lost in directionless, haunted by the knowledge of what they've done and the realization that their once sacred bond has been irrevocably shattered.
And then there's Julian, their enigmatic professor, who has played such a pivotal role in shaping their worldview. He's the one who introduced them to the world of ancient Greek rituals and philosophy, who encouraged their intellectual elitism and their sense of being exceptional.
But when the truth about the murders comes out, he abandons them. Refusing to acknowledge any responsibility for what has transpired. It's a cowardly act that leaves them feeling betrayed and utterly alone.
Julian's role in the novel is fascinating and complex. He's a brilliant scholar and a charismatic teacher, but he's also deeply flawed. He's irresponsible, self-absorbed, and ultimately unwilling to face the consequences of his actions.
His abandonment of the group raises some important questions about the role of a teacher and the potential dangers of intellectual arrogance. He cultivates their sense of intellectual superiority, but he fails to instill in them a sense of moral responsibility. He feeds their minds but neglects their souls, leaving them unprepared for the real world and the consequences of their actions.
And in the end, it's Richard who's left to pick up the pieces, to try to make sense of the chaos they've created. He's the only one who seems to experience any genuine remorse for their crimes, and he's the only one who attempts to confront the truth about what happened.
He's a deeply flawed character, complicit in their crimes. But he also serves as our moral compass throughout the novel, allowing us to see the events unfold through the eyes of someone who is both drawn to and repulsed by the group's dark allure.
And in the final pages of the novel, Richard reflects on the events that have transpired. And he comes to a profound realization about the nature of beauty knowledge and the human condition. He realizes that his pursuit of beauty and knowledge was corrupted by his own vanity and his desperate need to belong.
He was so fixated on becoming one of them that he ignored all the warning signs, all of the indications that something was deeply wrong with their worldview.
And it's through Richard's journey that Tartt explores the seductive nature of groupthink and the dangers of surrendering one's individuality to a charismatic leader like Henry. You know, the group dynamics are fascinating, how they isolate themselves, creating their own rules and justifications for their actions. It's almost like they form a cult of intellectual elitism with Henry as their prophet.
There's that constant tension between the allure of their lifestyle and the creeping sense that something is terribly off. It makes you question the price of belonging and what we're willing to sacrifice for acceptance.
That's what makes The Secret History such a compelling read. It's not just a murder mystery, it's a psychological study of human nature, of the dark undercurrents that can exist even in seemingly privileged and intellectual circles.
Tartt's writing is so immersive. She creates this atmosphere of both beauty and dread. With vivid descriptions of the New England landscape and the group's rituals and obsessions, you really feel transported to that world even as it becomes increasingly disturbing.
And she uses language so masterfully. For example, there's a passage where Richard describes the aftermath of the Bacchanal, saying, "Beauty is terror. Whatever we call beautiful, we quiver before it." It perfectly encapsulates the novel's central theme, the intertwined nature of beauty and darkness.
It's as if they've been corrupted by their own pursuit of beauty, twisting it into something grotesque and destructive.
Right, and the novel doesn't offer any easy answers or simple moral judgments. You know, Tartt leaves it to the reader to grapple with these complex questions about morality, responsibility, and the limits of human knowledge.
So after this deep dive into The Secret History, what would you say is the lasting impact? What's that one thought-provoking question you'd want to leave our listener with?
I think Tartt challenges us to examine our own desires and motivations. You know, what compromises are we willing to make in pursuit of our goals? What price are we willing to pay for belonging, for knowledge, for beauty? The Secret History serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of these ideals can lead to dark places if we're not careful. It's a story that lingers long after you finish reading, prompting reflection on the nature of truth, guilt, and the seductive dangers of unchecked ambition.
Yeah, and in the final pages of the novel, Richard reflects on everything that's happened. And he comes to this profound realization about the nature of beauty knowledge and the human condition.
Right.
You know, he realizes that his pursuit of beauty and knowledge was corrupted by his own vanity and his desperate need to belong.
Absolutely.
There's a passage that I think really encapsulates this. Beauty is terror. Whatever we call beautiful, we quiver before it.
Yes, that's a powerful line. And it speaks to the central theme of the novel. This duality of beauty and terror, the inherent danger in seeking transcendence without acknowledging that darkness that resides within us all. You know, Richard realizes that beauty can be a destructive force, especially when it's pursued without a strong moral compass.
And he also comes to understand the importance of taking responsibility for his actions, of acknowledging the harm that he's caused both to himself and to others.
Right.
The novel ends on a note of profound disillusionment. But there's also a glimmer of hope in Richard's newfound awareness of the complexities of the human heart.
It's a bittersweet ending, one that leaves you with a sense of both sadness and understanding. You know, The Secret History is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of beauty and knowledge, however noble in its intent, can lead to dark and destructive consequences if it's not tempered by compassion, empathy, and a deep respect for the sanctity of human life.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this deep dive into The Secret History. It's been a fascinating journey through the dark and complex world that Donna Tartt has created.
Absolutely.
And I hope this has inspired you to revisit the novel or to pick it up for the first time. And for those of you who are already fans, I'd love to hear your thoughts and interpretations. Join the conversation on our social media channels, and let's continue exploring the enduring power of The Secret History. Until next time, happy reading.